Welcome to another episode of Chad's Chat. Join Chad Chelius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone. Today's podcast is sponsored by Tamin Incorporated, a full-service accessibility and technology practice. Tamin partners with organizations of all sizes to shift mindsets and empower people. Wherever you are on your inclusive journey, Tamin's team can help you with web accessibility assessments and accessible digital solutions. Tamin believes that access to information is a human right, so head on over to tamininc.com and get more information. My name is Chad Chelius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor as well as training director and accessibility wizard at Chak's Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I am an accessibility Jedi. Not only am I an accessibility Jedi, but I'm also the director of media productions. And Chad and I are both certified as accessible document specialists. And if you look on our business cards, they actually both do say accessibility wizard. But since my last trip to CSUN, I was able to get an Obi-Wan Kenobi robe. And I feel like I am an accessibility Jedi. I have left my wizard ways in the wings. And I am now, I've graduated to Adobe Jedi. So.
You're no longer Gandalf the Gray, you're Gandalf the White.
There you go. It's something like that for sure.
No, we had fun with those titles. I know we had kind of gone back and forth and, you know, everything that we can, it just like, I didn't really like any of them. And then somebody said, what about accessibility wizard? I'm like, I kind of like that. You know, it's just fun. It's not serious. You know, I don't want to be taken too seriously, but I think it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Well, there's been a time or two where someone has said, oh my gosh, you make it look so easy, like magic. And so it just kind of sticks, you know,
Sure,
so it works out good. Well, Chad, today's session, we're going to get right into it. No banter. So for all of those of you who send us hate mail about our, 3 to 5 minutes of banter in the beginning of every podcast, this is all you get. Today's session is accessibility pitfalls to avoid when creating Word documents. So when we create Word documents, there are a lot of things people kind of build into the Word document that kind of sets them back already, making accessibility challenges before they really even get started in kind of putting content into their document. So we're going to talk about some of the things you should avoid when creating Word docs when the goal is to make them either natively accessible or accessible in the PDF stage later. So
yeah.
Hopefully.
And I would say, like, when it comes to Word documents, I would encourage everybody to use caution when using the default Word templates that are available in the template gallery, because some of them are very creative, but they can be really dangerous from an accessibility standpoint. They can be really dangerous. So just use them with caution. I've seen a couple of templates where they were like entirely table based, and that creates some significant challenges for us. So.
Well, and that's like Adobe stock. I've downloaded, I don't know how many InDesign templates, and you're like, who made this? How would you, there's like 300 styles, and you can tell it's machine generated because each of the style names includes like the font size and font property. And I'm like, who does that?
Right.
I mean, I know there's some people that do, but not for everything. You can tell it's completely, generated.
I will tell you, I take my approach to building styles is very similar to web design. Right. Mm-hmm. Because like, in web design, in the HTML, there's never any information about what the page looks like.
Right.
That is all controlled with the CSS. Right. Yep. And so I take a very similar approach in InDesign. I typically name my styles based on what they do, not what they look like.
Right.
Right. I mean, sometimes I'll add like the color to it. Like you had said in our previous podcast, like you did heading blue, or heading red,
right.
Sure. Then that makes sense to add a color to it if that makes sense. But for the most part, I'm like main heading, subhead, byline,
subhead.
Yeah,
that's the one that always gets me when I get your documents. I know it's a Chad document. When I see subhead, I'm like, what the heck? My brain just does not work that way. So it's better you than me. So.
Two different ways of thinking, right?
Agreed. So one of the first things that we get, this is really kind of a very typical, is people say, I export my document to PDF and my cover is not tagged at all. My title isn't coming through. None of that's coming out. And what we find is typically on inspecting that source, someone has taken all of the cover information, double clicked on the header and embedded it into the heading of the document. And it's no longer part of the active page content. And you and I both know anything that is in the header or in the footer is artifacted when you're exporting to PDF, correct?
Yeah. And what you just described made my brain hurt. Like as I was like thinking about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is really challenging. But yeah, like anything you put in the header and footer is going to get artifacted. But I've seen that too, Dax. I think you and I have both worked on a document where they had put the cover in the header, and I mean the information was bigger than the header, so it actually fell onto the page.
Right.
But fundamentally it was in the header. And you export it and you're like, where's all my cover information? Yep. And upon inspection you're like, oh wow, they put it in the header. That's interesting. So if you want it to be read, do not put it in the header and footer area. Just put it on the page. Right. Well,
and there you can use it to your benefit, because if you have a big giant cover image and then you've got text on top of it, maybe you've got logos and some other stuff maybe not logos, but basically a big image, right? You can put the image in the header footer and then leave your title, your text, to be as active content on the front, as part of the actual page. So that when you export to PDF, the decorative cover, because you're choosing it to be decorative by putting it in the header footer, is artifacted by default, and your title is the thing that gets read. So you can use it correctly. The saying, with great power comes great responsibility. Just know that, that's a thing. Which brings us to, we're talking about the title and the cover of a document, Chad, the title tag, right?
Yeah. I mean, Microsoft Word, every Word document you create comes with a title style. And, that style is enticing to people. They're like, oh, I should use that for the title of my document, and of course you can modify it to make it look however you want, but I think it's very enticing for people to use the title because it makes sense. The unfortunate part about that is that Word, or I should say Microsoft, in their infinite wisdom, is not mapping that title tag to a PDF tag other than a P tag, right?
Yep.
And so, you use this title that you think is very important content, and when it comes to accessibility, you're expecting it to output as an H1 tag. And unfortunately, it does not. Now, we know that we can make it output to an H1.
Right.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, the way you do it is you would right click on the style in the style panel and choose modify. And then when the modify style pop-up pops up, down at the bottom in the left-hand corner, there's the format drop-down. And if you click on that format drop-down and go to paragraph, the pop-up for paragraph opens up, and there is the second item down is outline level. And you will see that the title tag, when you go into modify, will say that the outline level is body text. So you just click the little drop down and choose level 1, and that will set it on export to a level 1. Which brings up another point that's associated with this. PDF UA2 has introduced officially the title tag. And unfortunately, though, JAWS and NVDA still do not recognize the title tag. So just like Word, if you use a title tag in your document, it's still going to be voiced as a paragraph tag. So until JAWS and NVDA catch up with that it is much better for you from a structural standpoint to use the H1 as that title tag, right? And so the argument we hear over and over again, and this is mostly coming from the European sections, say, well, but if you use an H1 for the title, then it's going to appear in your table of contents. If you use an automatic table of contents, sure. But you can remove it from your table of contents really easily with like one swipe and a click. Yep. So why not give the user the most information and allow them to know that this is in fact the most important heading in the document, which is the title, you know?
Yep. And anybody who knows us knows that we always err on the side of the user, right? Yeah. So, so even though PDF UA 2 has come out and said, hey, we're now allowing you to use the title tag, that's great, but Dax and I will not be using it until JAWS and NVDA voice it appropriately, right? And I don't know what the right, I don't know if, I never really thought about it, Dax, but I mean, do I want it to say title? Do I want it to say, this is this is important information title, right?
I would say it just would say title. Like I would say it would say, annual earnings report title, just like it says annual earnings report heading level 1. It gives the person the title. So in a perfect world, JAWS and NVDA, if you guys are listening, we'd love to have you, love to see that fixed. So,
and I'll tell you, I'm sitting here. I have Douglas Gary's card. Sorry, his card has Braille on it, which makes the visual text kind of hard to read. But Douglas Gary works for Vispero, which is the company who makes JAWS. And he asked me for feedback. He said, send me the things that you're finding frustrating, and we'll see what we can do about it. So the title is certainly one that I'm going to send to him right away. It's like, hey, listen, PDF UA 2, right? Let's make sure it's voiced correctly.
Well, and it's funny because you met him at CSUN, right? And I have Mick's card. So Mick is the president of NVDA, of NV Access. And so I talked to his team about having them come on the podcast to talk about the importance of testing with a screen reader. Now, to be fair, Mick and his team, they're not the technical end. They are the user end, right? They represent the user end. So I wouldn't actually kind of confront them about, hey, why aren't you using the title tag? And why aren't you doing this? Or why aren't you doing that? They're really more focused on the importance of testing documents with a screen reader to understand the user experience. I 100% respect that. But we also know that there is a way to submit tech support requests through NV Access, and definitely that's probably a more appropriate channel. So
for sure.
So going back, I know we got off on a little tangent there, but going back to header footer, one of the other things we see all the time is people put links in the footer. And then they export to PDF because they want to put their web address and their phone number and their address. And then they export to PDF and they get a bunch of untagged annotation errors. Chad, tell us about that.
Yeah. So, and it's funny. I mean, this problem exists in Word as well as Adobe InDesign. Right. So in Adobe InDesign, if you put a link on a parent page, you're going to get the same problem. And the problem occurs because, as we all know, in Word, anything you put in the header or footer area gets artifacted. Okay. Same thing in InDesign. Anything you put on the parent page gets artifacted. However, a link is a unique type of object, right? And fundamentally, links kind of float on top of the document. I don't know if that's a good way of describing it, Dax, right? They kind of float on top.
It's a different layer.
Yeah. And so when you have a link attached to text, but the text gets artifacted, that link, I always say it goes into purgatory. Right.
It's missing its buddy. They need buddy pairs, right? When you go to the swimming pool, you got to find your buddy, right? Your swim buddy. Like we're both previous scout leaders. You got to have your swim buddy. So the link is missing his swim buddy, which is the text.
Yeah. Yeah. The link has nothing to attach itself to. And the error you get, you get it in Acrobat, you get it in the pack checker, you get it in the common look validator. They may all call it something slightly different, but basically it's unmarked annotation, right, is the error that you're going to get. And it's because you've got these links, these annotations that are floating in purgatory, not attached to anything. They're not connected to anything, and therefore they're inaccessible. So that's why we tell people do not do that, right? Because you're only going to create, and especially like if you put it in the footer and you've got a 22-page Word document, you're going to have 22 errors, one for every page of your document, right? So it really makes a bit of a mess, right? And the solution is delete those links, or probably the right way to do it is go back into Word and remove the link from that text. And that way it'll be artifacted. I know sometimes people will want the first instance of that item read. Unfortunately, you would have to do it manually. I could tell you there's a product called Access Word that allows you to make the first instance in a header or footer taggable. So that's a kind of a nice feature, in the event that you want that behavior. But if you don't have third-party software, you're going to have to tag it manually in Acrobat and then apply the link to it.
So I have a little bit of a trick, right? So here's the thing. In Acrobat, by default, it has automatic link detection enabled. So if you in your footer just type in www.whatever.com and you don't make it a link, but you style it blue and you give it an underline just like it were a link, the automatic detection inside Acrobat will allow a user to click on any one of those pages and get to the link. However, for the screen reader user, it acts just like regular text. So this is where what you said about manually tagging that first one, I would go to the first one, highlight, put my cursor in the tags tree where I want it to be, and then I'm going to highlight that piece of text, right click and hit create link so that it adds it to the tags tree. And now that first one is there. And you get the best of both worlds. As a assistive technology user, I hear that link is the first one or the last one, whichever way you want to go with it. But for a sighted person, they could click on any one of the pages. And so a lot of people are used to that ability to click on any link at the bottom of the page. What they don't realize is that they don't read it. No one ever reads the content of the page and goes to the end and goes, hyperlink website. But if you're using assistive technology, you have to do that. It's going to vocalize it every single time, which gets really annoying. So the idea of styling the look as a hyperlink and then allowing Acrobat's auto detection to kind of help is a great compromise between accessible consideration and visual access.
Yeah, because if you tagged that link on every page, it would create a disruptive experience for users of assistive technology, right? Because like in random locations, it's just going to randomly read that URL, like maybe sometimes in between two paragraphs, right? So it's not a great experience for users of AT, but if you're a sighted user and you like that ability to be able to click on a link from any page that you're on, you could benefit from the auto detect feature inside of Acrobat. I find it a little bit frustrating because that is a application preference that you can disable, but we can't build it into the document. We can't say...
but most people don't even know it's there, don't even know that it's a preference. That 90% of the average users are leaving it by default. And if you tell them, hey, did you know that you can turn this off? They're like, what? That's a thing? I didn't even know. So you kind of got to assume that it's the default behavior in most cases. But going back to the idea of listening to that, it'd be almost as if you tag the page number on every page. So as you're hearing the paragraph, all of a sudden you hear a random 9, and this is where we want to go to the next 10. And this is, this kind of a thing, right? And so we don't want that noise, that other stuff to be in the way. Yeah. So, and so the next thing, Chad, in Word, going back to, I think we've covered that one pretty good, is automatically generated alt text in your Word document. And there is a way to turn this off. I don't know how many times when you create a Word document, one of the steps you should be taking when you're all done is to run the Microsoft Accessibility Checker. It did not do this before, but it now will tell you when it's automatically generated descriptions and allow you to go review what those are. But if you have a previous version, not the Office 365 version, but a previous version of Word, you don't have this capability to go back and review the automatically generated. So oftentimes the checker will just say, yep, you're good to go. All your alt text is there, and off you go. And then you find, automatically generated, with high confidence alt text somewhere in your PDF. So to remove that, if you go to review in Word and then check accessibility, and then in the drop down, go to options for accessibility, and the accessibility dialog pops up, there is a checkbox that says automatically generate alt text for me. And you can uncheck this box and it will never automatically generate alt text for you ever again. Yay.
Yeah. I mean, Dax, when we were at CSUN this year, there were a lot of discussion about AI, right? Yeah. I mean, in the accessibility world, they're considering AI. They're trying to figure out where it could be beneficial, where it could be used. I mean, there's all these different ideas, right? But one of the areas is in generating alt text for you. One of our partners, Vengage, has actually implemented this feature, and I would put it in the successfully category, right?
Yep.
Because you read the descriptions it generates and you're like, wow, I don't think I could have done any better, right? You know what I mean? Yeah. It's really solid descriptive text, where Microsoft Word, I mean, as big as Microsoft is, 9 times out of 10, it tells me it's an image of a sunglasses or image of a sign, and I'm like, huh, I thought it would be a little smarter, but so, I mean, the short answer is currently, right? This could certainly be subject to change, and we're not here to bash anybody, but the reality is that currently Word's auto-generate alt text feature is just very poor, right? Yeah. I would not use it for anything. It's just not substantial enough. So like I said, I know Microsoft is working on accessibility improvements. And so my hope is that that's an area where they do, push the envelope a little bit and do a better job.
Well, I will let the cat out of the bag a little bit early, Chad. In June or July, we might have Microsoft, a representative from Microsoft, on to talk about some of the new improvements in PowerPoint, which I'm super excited for. Can't say anything, but super excited for that. And some of the new advancements that are coming that are going to be rolling out for Word. And I'm excited, and I had a really candid conversation with my contact at Microsoft when we were at CSUN, and they were very responsive. And many of the things I talked about, they said, we're working on that. We're going to have a rollout. So I said, hey, let's get on the podcast and talk about it. And they're like, sure. Let's make it happen. So we've had some talks. We're getting there. So stay tuned and let other people know, because it's things are coming. So
I mean, I want to see software improve probably more than anybody, right? You know what I mean? I want to see them do good things, and so I'm always excited when a company implements a new feature that I think would benefit myself, other people in the accessibility industry. So yeah, I mean, that's always great news to hear when a company is working on improving their products.
Well, and it makes it easier for us for training. When you go into a classroom and say, okay, here's the tool and here's how it's supposed to work, but it doesn't actually work this way. And here are the 3 workarounds you have to do to make it better. The people in the class just start looking at you like, what?
Yeah.
You
yeah.
know?
Or you
and,
go
and
and you're
bosses
like,
don't get it.
Yeah, you go in and you're like, don't touch any of these buttons, right? And you're like, well, that's kind of a weird approach, but I'm like, it's for your own good, right?
Right. No, I totally agree. So we talked about bullets in a previous podcast, but one of the things we see all the time in Word is people creating manual bullets. They type the bullet character in and then they type the sentence and they keep going. And usually it's because there's a formatting issue. They can't figure out how to get it to act a certain way. Maybe it's because they want to use 2 columns in their Word doc of bullets, and they don't understand how to insert a column break or a section break. And so it becomes a tab stops with a series of manual bullets or something else. So just realize there are ways inside Word to make a 2-column layout with bullets in each column without having to do tab stops. And then, one of the other ones is what bullet you choose makes a difference. Right? Because, we have on our website, if you go to the downloads area, there is an article. I think it's in our downloads area. Let me check real quick. Accessibilityunravel.com. And then you go to downloads. Yep. How does my bullet sound in JAWS is an article. Well, it's really an article with a download at the end. So you can read the little bit of the article and then download a tip sheet that shows you how all the bullets, or a lot of bullets, I think they're over 100, are voiced by assistive technology. And the idea is that things like the little diamond is voiced as lozenge, and some other things are voiced as hollow circle or right pointing pointer. You would be surprised at what some of the things are that are voiced.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that surprises a lot of people. But that also goes with the learning process. In most of the classes I teach anymore, I read a document for them, at least for like 10 minutes.
Using assistive technology. Yeah.
Because I think it's so important, and it creates that connection where people are like, oh, wow, I get it now. I now understand why you're telling me to do these things, or why you're telling me not to do these things, right? Because it can really make a difference. One of the other, I don't know if I know I made a video on this, Dax. It was the dot leaders. Right?
Oh, yes.
How dot leaders are voiced in various circumstances. And, like NVDA counts the number of dots and tells you how many there are, and not helpful, right? But, the characters are there, so it's trying to deal with it, in one way or another. So
one of the other things that people don't know about is that track changes are not accessible. They are voiced in native Word. You can hear the screen reader tell you where certain things have been edited, but it's really complicated to understand. And in fact, if you go on LinkedIn and follow me and look at one of my most recent posts, I did a screen recording of assistive technology reading through track changes. And it is very hard to understand. In fact, not only did I post it on LinkedIn, but we have a PDF accessibility Facebook group that has over 4,400 members. We're well over 4,000 members. And I posted that same video there for people because people don't understand that user experience. And when you listen to it, it is just really hard to understand. In fact, we'll link to it in the show notes for this podcast. But track changes, if you're going to export to PDF, realize that will not be made accessible. So in Word, it can be listened to, but really very arduous process. But when you export to PDF, the visual style of the strike through or the underline is carried over, but no tagging information is associated with those edits. So they're going to read it just like it's regular text.
Yeah. So Dax, the last thing I think we wanted to talk about was a manual table of contents.
Yep.
in Word, right?
Yeah.
And you and I see these a lot. And when I do see them, I just kind of cringe. I'm like, oh man, somebody like painstakingly formatted this table of contents and manually typed everything in there. Word has a table of contents feature that will automatically build your table of contents for you. And the
based on the heading structure though, right? That's the most important part.
Well, based on the use of styles, right? So,
right.
It's very same thing in Adobe InDesign, right? Unless you've used styles in your document, you can't use the table of contents feature, right? Yeah. And so, as long as you've used styles in Word, and more specifically, you've used heading styles in Word, you can automatically build a table of contents for your document in like 3 seconds. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. And the benefit to all of you. Well, the first benefit is it builds a table of contents for you. Right. I mean, that's the first benefit. The second benefit is the table of contents is properly tagged when we make the PDF file. And then every table of contents entry is linked to that part of the document for functionality. Right. So when somebody's reading through the table of contents and they come upon vacation time and they want to know about vacation time, they can say, follow the link. It takes them to page whatever in the document, and then they can read about the vacation time. So it's a great feature. I mean, it's a great feature for efficient document management, but it's also a great feature for accessibility. Yeah.
Well, and little known feature that people don't know, that you can create a table of figures or a table of tables inside Word as well. There is that feature that is part of the Word package. So realize you don't have to manually create all these other things. One thing to note though, we see this often, is you cannot insert headings into your table of contents. You can't go into your TOC and say, here's a new heading level in this one, and here's a new heading level in there, because often that will get wrapped in a TOC tag that then makes it harder to, you have to go in and remediate that. You've got to go fix that. So just know that. And the other thing is, if you add headings into your TOC and then you go back in and update your TOC, anything you've manually added to the TOC gets removed. So you don't want to customize that TOC until you're all the way done with it. Maybe you have to add a paragraph or something else, but just know if you modify your TOC, there is going to be extra work that you're going to need to do in the PDF stage.
For sure. All right. Well, listen, I think that's a pretty good list, Dax. I know we kind of put that together, and as we were going through it, I was thinking like, these are really good tips, for people to know. Word is one of those programs that people use all the time, and it's what I would say, like, from an accessibility standpoint, it's the most common source for most of the PDFs we see, right? Most of the time they're coming out of Word. So, and you and I always say that if you just follow like a handful of practices in Word as you're building your Word document, you are going to be able to generate a reasonably accessible PDF file right out of the chute. Right.
Well, it's why people say, well, Word docs are way more accessible than PDFs. Well, it's garbage in, garbage out. Yeah. And if you've used styles in Word, you've pretty well got an accessible piece of text, and then adding alt text to your images, now that part of it's accessible. So just a few things can really, make your document pretty close to accessible all the way. Yeah. But if you're looking for getting it PDF UA compliant or all the way accessible in every aspect or most aspects, there's a plugin called Access Word that we highly recommend for large organizations that are they've got a lot of contributors of content and all of it needs to be accessible, rather than pouring all that responsibility onto one or two people. And I bet some of you are those one or two people listening to this podcast right now. What imagine the difference in your workflow. If 80 to 90% or more of the accessibility was already done before it even got to you, what a game changer that would be. Because I would hazard to say that it's probably more like 30 to 40% of accessibility in most current workflows.
And what I love about Access Word is that it's not a steep learning curve, right?
Yeah.
Like with a lot of the products, you really have to be knowledgeable about accessibility and really have like a solid understanding of the tag structure. Access Word is really just asking you to use Word correctly. And if you do that and then, know a handful more things, you are creating some solid accessible PDF files. Yeah.
Well, there's one tip that we didn't cover, and that was layout tables that are used just to space things out. And Access Word as a feature where you just select the table and say, hey, this is a layout table. I don't want it to be exported as a table. And here's the order in which I want you to read the content. Go down the first column, then down the second column, and down the third column, rather than going across the row when you export. And it does it flawlessly, and it does a great job. So even then, you don't have to follow all the accessibility best practices of not using the layout table. You can just designate it as a layout table, and Access PDF or Access Word does the work for you.
Yeah, we love it. It's a really great product. Well, listen, everybody, thank you for tuning in. I hope you found our tips, our Microsoft Word tips valuable. I hope you gleaned some new information, and it helps you on your accessibility journey. Once again, we want to thank Tamin for being our sponsor. Tamin partners with organizations of all sizes to shift mindsets and empower people. So head on over to tamininc.com to learn more information. My name is Chad Chelius.
And my name is Dax Castro, where each week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.